All right, all right. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to this week's Griscom stream. David here. Sorry, I flip that around. Little behind the scenes action. Wasn't able to do all the movie magic, so y'all can look outside my window. But yeah, I hope you all are nice wherever you're at. It's hot as hell here. It's going to be hot as hell for a very long time, but I'm ready to push through. We got a lot of fun stuff to get to. As always, feel free to jump in the in the chat with questions. These are much more casual than the main shows. Though we're going to be trying some new stuff out this week. I don't know if people saw, but all through June, Matt and I are doing a little bit of a promotion for Left Reckoning. We're calling Summer Streams, where we're going to be releasing the post game. And the post games, for people who aren't subscribers already, are the show we do immediately after the main show on Wednesday nights, where we, hang out a little bit, take questions from the chat, voicemails. This week, we're going to be joined in the post game by Ben Burgess, and all of that will be open to the public on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Left Reckoning. We're really trying to see if we can boost our Twitch presence, because it's always good to be as many places as possible. So be sure to check that out. Really looking forward to that. And I might wait to make some of these other announcements with Matt, but we actually are going to be announcing a new tier for our Patreon that's going to come with some extra bonus episodes each month as well. And y'all keep on pestering Matt to do some streams as well too. But we got some fun stuff to get to. I'm ready to jump right into it. Appreciate all the congratulations on my engagement. Still sort of basking in that. Strom wants to know if I'm going to the Sublation extravaganza in Yankee Land later this month. No, I will not, but it seems like it's going to be a lot of fun. They're doing really interesting stuff at Sublation. If you haven't already checked it out, be sure to. You can read a piece I wrote on Greg Abbott and the way that he's been using COVID to increase his executive powers. But there's been some really good pieces so far. Matt McManus had a really interesting piece on fascism. Ben's been writing for them. Be sure to check it out. But yeah, as always, feel free to jump in with questions. But before we get there, I don't know. This has just been on my mind, and I figured I'd ask the audience this first. If y'all are familiar with the movie Smokey and the Bandit, because that's one of my all-time favorites, and I was just on the road, just doing a quick road trip out to Colorado, and it was on my mind. It's probably one of my favorite movies. It's not going to hold up to any kind of real artistic criticism. But for a movie you can just sort of put on and feel warm, it's a must watch. I mean, it's Burt Reynolds, Jerry Reed does all the music, Sally Field's in it, and it just like it's funny watching some of those older like Southern films, or even some of the TV shows, to just see how well the right wing has how much the right wing has sort of succeeded in brainwashing a lot of people in the South. Because think about like Outlaw Country. Smokey and the Bandit is literally about illegally transporting beer across the South because it was against the law in a lot of those states. It's very much anti-police, and it's a lot about like worker solidarity. If you haven't seen the film, I highly suggest watching it. But it's Burt Reynolds and Jerry Reed just sort of pushing through the South, trying to bring a shipment of Coors Banquet, which was illegal back then. To do. You weren't allowed to bring it out east. And throughout, they're just getting help from everyday working people, because everyone basically has the same understanding. Fuck the cops, and look out for the other members of your class. If you're a working person like me, you and I are the same. And it's just, I don't know. It's just sometimes amazing to go back and look at those older films. I mean, it's not even that old. It's like 70s, but and just see how much like brainwashing has been done, like to Southerners, about their own culture and their own history. It's a really phenomenal film. I don't think we want to do movie stuff on this podcast necessarily, but I could be convinced. And what I wanted to ask folks is if they can think of any other films that sort of fit into that kind of general feel, because I could use another one like that to throw on. I've probably seen most of the ones that folks might suggest, but I'm always happy to get some more suggestions there. And also Eastbound and Down, the title track, which then later became the HBO the name of the HBO show, with Danny McBride. It's also an all-time banger. But anyway, Strom notes, that's interesting. That film came out the year after the Leonard Skinner crash, and it was all filmed on I-285. Hell yeah. No, I mean, this is a fucking good movie. And I mean, like, Jerry Reed also, like, just is an incredible musician, and I love his character in it, the snowman. I always wanted to get, as a kid, I was always trying to beg my mom, because we used to do these insane trips from Texas to South Carolina when I was a boy. And so I spent a lot of time when I was like really, really young on the road, and I was always trying to get us to get a CB radio. Well, yeah, let me see what folks are saying. Yeah, I did get engaged. For folks who are curious, very excited about that. Friend Kowalski's in here, says thoughts on Rocky Mountain oysters. Any recipes? I mean, I've had Rocky Mountain oysters, but they've always been fried. I wouldn't really go out of my way to get them, but that's a good way to show your boys that you're sort of fearless. I remember one time having to explain to my brother, he's a smart guy, but he just, like, it wasn't computing in his head for a second. When he saw it on the menus, like Rocky Mountain oysters, and they listed them right next to like Gulf oysters and things like that. And I was like, how many oysters do you think are up in the mountains? Took a minute to realize they were bull nuts. But let's see. We got an Idaho question. And if you're in Idaho, be sure to check out the work that my teacher and friend Luke Mayville's doing in Idaho. It's been really inspiring. Living in, but their question here is, living in rural Idaho, the rural equals backward vibe that much of the left puts off, even against any non-coastal urban. Is it worth pushing back against? Thoughts on that phenomenon in general? Well, one, I mean, I definitely think it's something worth pushing back against. That's if I would hope people realize this is a big part of the project of Left Reckoning. That's why we try to, spend some time. We don't do as much as I would like, but, you have to also keep these kind of shows topical, or people don't keep up with them. But, that's why we've been trying to do a lot of work of trying to uncover a lot of those histories. If you haven't seen, for example, the episode that we did on the fence cutting wars here in Texas, or the Populist Party in general, like reclaiming the kind of radical history, particularly the history of the Southwest, and I mean in that, like, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and the West at large, I think is really really, really important to be able to do, because, as I was just saying earlier, I mean, obviously it's Smoking the Bandit's a movie, and it's not it's not like a communist propaganda film or something like that, but you just see, like, the way that like a lot of Southerners see themselves as sort of, it's like a part of their culture to be, super respectful to the police officers. And there's always been little bootlickers in the South, don't get me wrong. But there's been a lot of rebels, and not that kind that most people associate with Southern rebels, like people who were anti-state, anti-capitalist, anti-property. And that goes all the way back to the beginning. And I think it's really important to be able to, like, not just uncover, but reclaim that history, particularly if you live in those areas. But what you're talking about, I think, is more of an attitude of, like, liberals, particularly, I would say, like, New York kind and LA kind. But I have no doubt that that's also something that's certainly shared. I mean, I see it in Austin all the time. I mean, it always blows my mind. People who, I meet in Austin, I was born here. So I have a little bit of a different connection with the area around here. But it really is surprising when you talk to somebody who's been living here for maybe like 15 years or so, and they never get out. They never get out of the city. Really just unbelievable to me, just like on a recreation level. No, but I mean, why? One, yes, we should be pushing back against it because it's inherently anti-solidarity. Two, it's a really, really negative artifact of the way of, like, the failures of the Democratic Party. So we had Nick Bolin on the show. The first time Nick Bolin was on the show was in response to a really great article that he wrote. Oh Lord, I'm sorry, friend. I'm forgetting the magazine that it was in. It's a newer one. but on why Democrats have lost like rural America. And he makes the argument that one, you should be caring about rural people just on a basic moral level, but this is where a lot of working people live. It's a lot more diverse place than a lot of people imagine. And again, you should be caring about it regardless of these things. But for some people, you have to give them all these caveats to care. Um, and two, like if you're a socialist, like the big labor push that we saw over the past 2 years, like most of those big strikes, think about John Deere, think about the Frito Lay movements, like those were in primarily, like rural parts of America. They weren't really concentrated in the cities. And there's something that's very notable, I think, to be paying attention to if you are socialist and you want to see this country change, that there is a lot of pushback that we're seeing from the working class in rural America. And two, rural America, when people talk about it, they conflate a lot of different things. And I think a lot of times folks forget that there are elites in, for example, rural Idaho or rural Texas, who have taken advantage of the crisis of rural America to really um, suck up a lot of the resources and land and wealth in those communities, and have left a lot of people extremely destitute. And being able to speak to that again, I think, is important just generally, but also politically. That was one of the things that was sort of exciting. We saw a glimmer of it with Bernie's 2016 campaign. I think it would have been better if it could have gone further, but certainly somebody who had a lot more appeal in those parts of the country than certainly Hillary Clinton ever did. Um, but yeah, I mean, I mean, again, I'm just making the case as to why you should care. Why does that exist? I think it happens because the Democratic Party tries to occupy the space of the left, and they're not a left-wing party, but they try to. And if you're not going to do class politics in America, the most vibrant and viable path for you to do is regional politics. And you don't have to be a historian of American politics to sort of see those divides. I mean, most of American political history has been regional. And when you see like the distribution of party control in this country, right? Regional politics have always been a viable kind of place for the two major parties, Republican and the Democratic Party, to sort of play on. So what happens then if that's the general strategy of of like the politicians on the national level? Well, then that starts to trickle down, I think, into a lot of people's attitudes. So like to be a good like liberal New Yorker, you have to have a hatred for West Virginia, right? And so far, so goes that logic. And we roast those people on this program a lot. The people who are always pushing the fucking dumbest idea ever, the liberal secession crap. Um, but you see that that's just an outgrowth of a failed political culture from the Democratic Party. That instead of it being corporate control of the state, instead of it being capitalists basically ruling over every facet of your life, oh, it's those damn ignorant people in rural America, right? Like that's the game that they play. And they create an idea of what it's like. I'm saying like liberal politicians and a lot of like liberal media in general create an idea of what it's like in the rest of the country that completely paints over a very vibrant and diverse history, right? So like these things come out of that kind of political failure, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, I could do a lot more on that, frankly. And if you're not already tuning in, keep watching Left Reckoning for more of that. But I think that that's certainly where it comes from. And to answer the first question, absolutely push back against that shit. Dude, definitely watch Smokey and the Bandit again if you haven't. Lord in heaven, if I could get Willie Nelson to do the wedding ceremony, I would be a happy man. It'd be a little difficult to get Waylon out of the grave, but maybe we'll try. Um, and hell yeah. Luke Mayville was my teacher at school, at college, and is the person who introduced me to Michael Brooks. So I owe a lot to that guy, and he an amazing thinker and writer and mentor in a lot of ways. And I've been so touched by the work that he's been doing in Idaho in particular. Strong, that was for you, calling Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas the Southwest. Hell yeah. Let me see. That's a good point by Conman on Rocky Mountain oysters, veal bull testicles to be precise. The process turns a bull calf into a steer. That's very true. um, Nothing weirder than that shit to me. Or when you see New Yorkers or people in Ohio with Confederate stuff, it's weird enough in the South, but like, Lord. Congressional baseball fans as being from New Mexico, we are used to not being seen as even a part of the United States a lot of the time. I mean, I love New Mexico. It's a unique place. I could see people having that perspective. No, I mean, like, this is why reading Southern history is really important. Ron says one of the greatest threats to Southern antebellum capital plantocracy was poor white Southerners, many of whom were revolutionary. Very true. I mean, and that's like, that's like one of the points that I try to make to folks. Is like, you're much more likely to be related to somebody who is fighting against these systems than, maybe if you're somebody who has a genealogy that's easy to track. Don't get me wrong, but I think most working people are much closer to the folks who are fighting against these systems. And I think it's important to remind folks on these. This point here, Left Reckoning, thoughts on encouraging lefties to relocate to red zones. A New York City friend expressed her reservations about moving to in-laws property in Kentucky. She worries about raising kids there. I think that if you're trying to move to a place because you don't like it, you don't like the people, you don't like the culture, I don't think you should move there. I mean, I hate that kind of meme that gets thrown around every time in election time, telling like rich tech workers from San Francisco to move to Montana or Wyoming. Those places have enough problems with rich people basically buying up all the land around them, and having people who are coming from places that have not done enough for workers thinking that they're going to come and sort of save a place that it's very clear they have a lot of contempt for. I think is a losing strategy, and also one that I just cannot support on any level. As your friend, I mean, that's their choice. I wouldn't necessarily be worried about raising children in Kentucky. Lots of people do it. Kentucky's a beautiful place. But yeah, like if you're somebody who has that kind of view about the rest of the country, then don't move there. I mean, that's it. I've never understood the argument. It's an annoying thing. It's a very Twitter thing, but you see it in Texas too. People be like, "Oh, I live in red hell in Texas and fuck everybody here," and it's like, well, if you're trying to change a place because you hate it and you hate the people, then you're always going to be unsuccessful. Somebody says, any advice for someone looking to attend grad school to study Marxism, social theory? Be careful. I don't know. I didn't do it. So I know probably as much as you do. I mean, I think it's worthwhile. I can only give you maybe some advices to try to find somewhere that you would want to be and want to get involved with people. Because one of the problems of a lot of grad students and socialist thinkers in this country is that they're very disconnected from normal people. Yeah. I appreciate all the questions today, y'all. Let me see. Oh, NBA Finals are on. Shoot, I should have planned better. I'm a tech worker in San Francisco. Many of us are capitalist conservative and put on a leftist facade. Well, in my experience, I've seen that to be very true. I mean, there's plenty of people who are, appalled at the current state of affairs all across the country, and people who work in tech are not immune to that. But yeah, the whole idea that like Silicon Valley is like some progressive bastion, I think is really getting pushed back against. Let me see. I mean, I'm just going to say, quite honestly, I don't think you should move anywhere for political reasons. I mean, at least in the the sense of you're going to move somewhere so your vote matters more. I mean, it's one is just ineffective, and two, you just don't want to be somebody who doesn't have roots somewhere trying to like really attack everybody in the community. I can't tell you I mean, I would love to spend more time in other parts of the country for sure, but like, I mean, I live in Texas. I'm from Texas. I lived in South Carolina for years. Those are places of the country that people think are like super conservative or whatever. And you also have to remember that these places are like 40% voting the other way, right? And that means that 4 out of 10 people that you're meeting, and also most people don't vote in the first place, I think one way about these things. And this kind of mythology of like, I mean, I've met hyper reactionary people from New York City, and I've met extremely left wing and progressive people from all over, right? And the red state, blue state stuff, I just think is such especially if you're a socialist, it's such a dynamic that you need to get out of thinking about, because it's about class everywhere. And most people vote whatever way they do because of whatever the dominant culture is in their community. Uh, Apart from very, very few people actually have the ability to vote for their material interests. And the people who do get to vote for that, frankly, are rich people. And they're rich people when they vote for the Democratic Party to get special favors, or for the Republican Party, to get tax cuts. Mike Davis has a really great essay that he wrote after the 2020 election, just sort of like looking at the numbers, looking at the way that the class formations are sort of lining themselves up across the country. And it was very convincing of making, he was relying on a couple other folks whose names escaping me right now, but, making the argument that like, a, a rich person who votes for the Democratic Party and a rich person who votes for the Republican Party, they're not the same in the sense that like they want different things out of politics, but they all want some kind of reward. Like the most basic way to think about it is that like, for the Democratic Party, what does the Democratic Party like really reward? It rewards technocracy. It rewards expertise in the sense of like having proper accreditation, having a degree, right? So that's why a lot of their coalition are people who thrive in that world. Um, in red states, these are people who have lots of money, right? They might own a few, businesses and make a lot of money, right? We'll call them small businesses, but I think that sometimes really doesn't paint the proper picture of the state of these enterprises. But yeah, they want to wage war on, on on a lot of the things that they want to wage a war, for example, on any kind of affirmative action kind of hirings. They want to wage war on technocracy and accreditation, not because they're against like the blob or like the deep state or whatever. It's because they want to continue to live in their community where they have effectively dominated and destroyed any kind of competition. Right? It's like they're both getting rewarded for what they're doing, and you can really like trap yourself by thinking about politics as like a red state, blue state thing, instead of paying attention to the class dynamic. Because, like, for example, if like Texas were to somehow start to become like a lock of a state for the Democratic Party, you would see business lining up behind the Democratic Party here, and they would get certain rewards for that. In the same way that those businesses now line up behind the Republican Party because they get rewards for that. And if you're missing like the battle underneath the headlines there, if you're paying too much attention to the red state, blue state stuff, in my opinion. I'm gonna be in New Mexico later this month, actually. So let me know where this was, congressional baseball fan. But they says there's a history of militant labor organizing the mining industry in New Mexico and Arizona in the early 20th century. One of the leaders of a strike in Clifton, Morenci, Arizona, went on to be a leader of the Cananea Mike strike, which was violently, I'm going to guess, repressed. Any new good books? I highly suggest reading Matt Huber's book, Climate Change is Class War. I just picked up, I've read it before. We read it with Michael a few years ago, but I just picked up a copy of Historical Capitalism by Wallerstein. And I'm very excited. I know some people were not super stoked on this, but I missed it when it came out. But I just picked up Christian Parenti's book, Radical Hamilton, which I'm looking forward to reading. I always find Christian Parenti interesting. Shmuel Rashad says, I wasn't familiar with the tech capitalist world until they started to infiltrate Austin. They definitely pose as anti-establishment when they just want zero regulation to maximize profit. Yeah, and like huge handouts, and they have less of a ideological problem receiving those. The thing that's funny about Austin and tech is it's not like tech is new here, right? You've had Dell and IBM. Like there's always been a lot of that here, but I think the hyper concentration and the highly speculative nature of a lot of the new tech companies that are coming out here, Salesforce, which is everywhere, is big here now. Obviously Apple and Tesla and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean it's definitely shifted the vibe of the city. And yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I mean, you probably know as well as me, but like I saw somebody tweet out, this is actually a little while ago, but I do think it's such a funny example of like one of these kind of crypto tech guys, like, you have to move to Austin. It's a rise and grind city. Everybody here works hard and they play hard, and it's just a place to make your millions. And it's just like, boy, the most famous movie about Austin, Texas is Slacker. you know? Very weird culture shift with a lot of these folks. Um, with regards to our friends, they're black and their partner is non-binary. Their move is more about access to property and family, and not political concern is about racism to kids. Well, I'll tell you, there's some really exciting stuff happening with the progressive movement in Kentucky. For sure, that's worth checking out. We're really looking forward to the Senate election in particular. Let me see. Part of my ignorance, I don't know who Peter Joseph is, but Ghost of Lumen says, do you think that labeling yourself as a socialist can hurt the movement because it's looked at negatively even by people who agree with socialist values? Saw Peter Joseph tweet about that. This is like a classic thing that you get from people on the left, and this has been going on. I think when I first became a socialist, I might have said some things on along this line a long time ago, but no, I don't think that being open about being a socialist is a bad strategy or bad thing to do. And hear me out as to why. There's certainly a lot of like propaganda and negativity that's associated with that word, but I think one thing that Bernie showed us is that you can own it and you can push through it, and then you can reclaim it. The fact is that they call Nancy Pelosi a socialist all the time and Barack Obama a socialist, and it's laughable. And of course, those people run away from it because they're not socialists. But I think one of the things that's really viable is actually like reclaiming that word, because there's a really proud history to stand on. I think one thing that I think, rather than running away from the word, um, is something that's really helpful, and particularly in the U.S., is actually breaking up that great tradition of American socialism that we have here, because it's deep in this country, and it's purposefully obscured. And I think helping people understand that like there is a very homegrown element to this is very helpful. But on the top line, the reason I'm really against any kind of like, oh, we'll come up with like a new terminology for ourselves. The reason I really don't like that is because you're lying. You're lying. And people can sniff that out pretty easily if you're lying to them about what it is that you think and what it is that you believe. Now, I don't think that you need to drape yourself up in costumes, right? And a lot of people like to do that. And I think that that's unhelpful. But that's something that's different from saying, yeah, I'm a socialist. And what being a socialist means is I think that the people who work and make this society function should not only be able to feed themselves, but should actually being able to live in the abundance that they create. I don't think that we should be in a situation where we have an incredible healthcare system, or at least the technical expertise and the mechanical ability to treat a lot of diseases, and people aren't able to treat it because the capitalist system creates a bar to entry that basically holds that right. Um, only for the wealthy and the affluent, right? Like I think going back to like those actual material concerns, most people can get through that. And yeah, they're going to smear you, and the right wings will attack you for it. But I think being earnest and honest about these things rather than running away from it is helpful, because it makes it seem like you do have something to hide, right? Like if it's very clear to most people who are listening to you or watching you or interacting with you that you're a socialist, but you're constantly denying it. It makes it seem like you do have some kind of secret ulterior motives, right? I've always felt that it's much better, and I think that that's one of the things that's been so great about this like new generation of politics that we're in right now, is that people are less afraid to articulate what it is that they believe, rather than running away from what their actual beliefs are. I mean, because how much of a coward position, what a cowardly position is, have something that you hold so true to yourself, but you're going to lie to the public about it, and you want them to trust you with power, right? No, I think it's much more viable to reclaim and fight for these these terminologies and concepts, rather than run away for them. All right, let me see. I want to tell you all, there's a couple of things I have lined up too. I might get into, but let me see if I can get caught up with questions. I really appreciate everything, and we'll keep this going for a little while. I have some time today. Um, all right, well, let me just share this story with y'all, because I think it's worthwhile, and then I'll come back for questions. How about that? Because we're going to talk about. So tomorrow we have a great show. By the way, we have Kurt Hackbars on again. Our LR Mexico correspondent. He's going to be talking about Biden's just absolutely despicable and failure of a summit of the Americas that AMLO is now not going to show up. It started, I believe, today, and it's going to go out through the rest of the week. Where basically Biden's just going to take some pictures with Bolsonaro, of all people, because he was refusing to allow countries like Cuba and Venezuela access to the summit of the Americas. Biden arbitrarily deciding who is and who is not, a member of the continent of North and South America. Really excited for that. I think we're going to talk about the Fed and inflation tomorrow, and a few other things. But I wanted to start with this because it ties into it ties into the conversation we're going to have tomorrow, and I think it's just an important thing to debunk. Hold on, let me pull this down really quick. I appreciate the question, but let me see. What do I need to do? I want to talk about. Here we go. Sorry. I want to talk about truckers. Y'all are probably bored with hearing it from your uncle and aunt about how nobody wants to work anymore. And y'all know the response to that. It's like, it's not that we have a labor shortage. We have a wage shortage in this country. And here is an example that I think really hits the nail on the head. We've heard a lot when it comes to trucking about the threat of automation in the industry. Andrew Yang made a big to-do about this in his presidential campaign. And, there's a part of that, there's certainly, something worthwhile in trying to protect industries from cost-cutting corporations, right? But it is always amazing to me how much easier it is to have conversations about some kind of future dystopia than the one that we're currently living in, right? Because the viability of automation for the truck infrastructure that we have in this country is a long ways off. And yeah, that's the kind of analysis that sells, but it also obscures the current reality that people are going through. So people have probably heard about the so-called trucker shortage. Right. And this is one of those things that is one of the bigger tricks of capitalism, where you talk about all this kind of, culture stuff, maybe some kind of techno dystopian stuff, instead of the actual material conditions. So this is a story that was up in the Arkansas Democrat just a couple days ago. It was a report on a study that was put out by the University of Arkansas, so School of Business. Let me get this right for y'all. Here we go. So this is a story in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Study disputes trucker shortage. Drivers leaving job for better wages, says UA researcher. The American Trucking Association, and remember when they interview these kind of groups, these kind of business associations, who is speaking and in whose interest they are speaking for. A lot of people get confused when they hear about the restaurant association, right? Oh, those are people looking out for restaurant workers. No, they're looking out for the profits of the restaurant industry. The American Trucking Association, similar kind of structure. They have been putting out the alarm for a long time, that there's a shortage of truckers in this country. And there's no doubt that there are less people who are willing to drive right now, but we'll get to the reason in a second, as to why. But they've been putting out this alarm, and it's worrying, right? Because this is the infrastructure that keeps food on the shelves, that keeps clothes in the stores, that provides a lot of raw materials that are used in production, right? This is the lifeblood of the American economy, is truckers, right? They do a very, very crucial service to us. So when you're talking about a threat to that industry, it's a serious one. But they know, the American Trucking Association say the industry is going to have to recruit nearly 1 million new drivers over the next decade in order to replace drivers that retire or leave the occupation. And now, when most people talk about this, they say, oh, here's another chapter in the story of Americans have lost the will to work. I just cannot tell you, in my life experience, right, coming from working class communities, coming from a working class family, that I've ever been able to say that the American working class is lazy. You can say a lot of things about them. They are overworked, they are tired, but they ain't lazy. So why is there this crisis? Well, there are currently near something around 1.9 million truckers in this country. And they're worried that the amount of people who are leaving the industry or retiring early is going to hamper their ability to provide the services that we so desperately rely on. Well, why is this? A study from the University of Arkansas found that it is stress, unrealistic deadlines, and strains on workers that have a huge impact on their willingness to continue in the industry. And for people who aren't familiar with the industry, you were oftentimes put on very, very tight deadlines. You were limited in how much you can drive in a day for safety and the sanity of the worker, but it's surely not enough. And you don't get paid overtime for driving a truck. The federal government limits the amount that a driver can drive a week to 60 hours, right? Along with other kind of stipulations, but 60 hours in a week. Just think about that for a second. After 40 hours, in most industries, you get something called overtime, time and a half for spending an unreasonable amount of time at work. The trucking industry has a carve out and an exemption for that. The number one leading cause of why people are quitting the trucking industry or retiring early is the lack of competitive wages. Now, truckers, make somewhere in the realm of like $55,000 in parts of the country like Arkansas, right? It's different everywhere else, which is a little bit above the national median wage. But if you think about what they're going through, what the stress of that job entails, let alone the social isolation and the fact that if you're a long haul trucker, you're oftentimes far away from your family and your community for days at a time, to the fact that you have unreasonable expectations set on you by your boss because they're just trying to make as much money as possible. Add to that the fact that these wages are not competitive to other industries that these truck workers, truck drivers are very, very capable of doing. So while you have seen some increase in wages for truck drivers, compared to other industries like construction or manufacturing, the competitive reality of a salary of a truck driver versus what they could be making construction or manufacturing has fallen over the past decade. Meaning that if you're somebody who's been working in this trucking industry, you realize very quickly that, what, I could work at a construction site in my community where I don't have to leave, right? I don't have to deal with these insane pressures. I get overtime if I work over 40 hours a week. Yeah, fuck this. I'm going. And the trucking industry has been extremely slow to answer this. What you get from them is all this kind of stuff. They're trying to lower their requirements that you need to get a CDL, right? They're trying to lower the age that you have to be to get a CDL, right? They're trying to come at the restrictions in the industry that are set up for safety reasons. Why? Because they don't want to pay higher wages to workers, despite the fact that there's incredible demand and a lot of profit to be made, because they think this is a temporary blip in their economic situation. And if they create a new wage floor, a new expectation for workers, they won't be able to roll that back in the future. So they are actually playing with fire, right? The trucking industry, the trucking corporations, they are playing with fire, putting us into a situation where we might have significant delays on food, raw materials, goods that are going on store shelves across the country, because they don't want to see any cut into their record profits. What you're seeing is people are moving, again, as I was saying earlier, into manufacturing and construction. So it's not nobody wants to work anymore. They don't want to work for you. They don't want to work for you in your abusive system. They don't want to work for you in an industry where you have gotten carve outs to cut out basic worker protections that exist in other industries. And again, as I'm saying, like, we're talking about the fact that people are driving 60 hours a week, which is absurd. You can't live a life like that. I know I have a lot of friends who were truckers and have left for this exact reason, because they were away from their family, they were away from their community. The hours were too punishing, and they weren't getting overtime. And they realized, hey, if I'm going to work 60 hours, I might as well work somewhere where I can make double when I'm making right now. And it just goes back to this kind of conservative nonsense argument that you've been getting. Oh, well, Americans don't want to work anymore. No, what you're seeing is that people are saying, we're going to gravitate to industries that are going to pay us higher and better than these industries that continue to sit on their hands when it comes to this very, very significant shift in worker militancy and that kind of complacent game that a lot of these companies, particularly restaurant industry, retail industry, trucking industry, play on. Desperation and poverty. There are, for some people, more escape routes, and not all, right? We're still talking about 2 million people who are still working in this industry, but people who have the option and the ability are walking out, and they're going somewhere that's going to take care of them a little bit better. Now, those industries too, construction and manufacturing, are no heaven on earth, right? And the point is not to sit here and think that those jobs are necessarily perfect, but rather that that's how bad shit is for workers in all these other industries. That going into other industries where there are significant labor questions, labor fights, labor struggles that are ongoing, that is preferable to the ones that they're currently in, right? And this is just a story that touches on a lot of industries. I think it's worthwhile to know these facts, because there's a lot of conservative disinformation out there, and it just gets parroted by the media. A lot of these papers, and shout out to the Gazette for covering this this study out from the University of Arkansas, but a lot of them don't, and they just sort of will parrot the complaints of the trucking industry and say, nobody knows why nobody wants to drive trucks anymore, right? And it turns out it's actually very, very simple to figure that shit out. And before I go back to questions, I just wanted to add and highlight an article out from our friend at Jacobin we just had on the program, Alex Press. She came to talk to us about Dollar General and this pretty exciting unionization effort there. But I wanted to share this with y'all on this too, because we're going to talk about inflation. We're going to talk about what Biden is wanting to do in this situation. The Federal Reserve is straight up saying they want you to make less money. That's how they want to deal with the American economy right now. They want the American workers to see their standard of living decline, so that the profits that are going to the top can continue to increase, right? And it's very worthwhile and important to be armed with the facts on this, because there is a very serious media attempt right now to make it seem like everybody's just sitting at home, which again is the most outlandish claim that you could ever make in this country. People who make that kind of claim are people who have never worked for a living, never understood what it means to live paycheck to paycheck, to make those kind of decisions on a weekly basis. To think that people are just sitting out on their ass and not doing anything right now just is the height of being out of touch and extreme privilege. I want to note this: as they're talking about cutting into your standard of living, as they're talking about nobody wants to work anymore, right? Remember that the scenario for those at the top of this country is very, very different. So this is a piece Alex Press put out, basically working off of a study that came out from the IPS Institute for Policy Studies called "The CEO to Worker Pay Gap is Climbing to Truly Obscene Levels." And let me just note a couple of the facts from this piece. Right, so they studied 300 of the top firms in this country, um, and they found that between 2020 and 2021, you saw a jump in the difference between the median worker salary at these companies to CEO salary was significant. Ready? In 2020, the difference between CEO and median worker was 604 to 1. Absurd and should be illegal then. In 2021, it was 670 to 1. And wait for this, ready? Wages at 106 of the firms did not keep pace with the 4.7% average US inflation rate last year. So when you get that kind of inflation, effectively what you're getting is a pay cut, right? And of those 67, so out of these 300 of the top performing corporations in this country, spent resources buying back their own stock, with repurchases totaling 43.7 billion. The biggest buybacks took place at Lowe's, Target, and Best Buy. And they also note in this piece, excuse me, 49 of the firms that they studied had ratios above 1,000 to 1 median salary worker to CEO payment. Now, as Alex Press notes, IPS argues that what they should be doing is there should be a limit on the amount between a CEO pay versus median worker pay. I totally agree. There should be prohibitions on CEOs being able to sell stock in their own company, right? For a period of so many years after they leave a company or whatever. I think that also makes sense. But as Alex Press notes, like, these reforms don't address the cause of this mind-boggling inequality, but they would help redistribute the wealth downward. And I think that that's a very, very fair case to make, right? This is something that is so immediate that I think most people can realize that it's disgusting, that the people who create the value at your corporation, the people who actually make the thing run, are getting paid so much less than the bloodsuckers at the top. And you could find some rules to cap that, and that's helpful and healthy. But until you really start to address the system of financialization, the power that the executive at corporations, the executive suite has over the corporations, particularly in the way that they're able to funnel money to themselves, until you start to address that dynamic, you're putting a Band-Aid on. But Lord in heaven, that's something that they should be spending a lot more time talking about on MSNBC and in Congress than what we're getting right now, because what we're going to get right now is going to be significant intervention from the Federal Reserve to try to punish workers. But yeah. I guess I'm not on YouTube. I can't get these weirdos out of the chat. I'm sorry. But I would love to take some more of y'all's questions, I think. Let me see real quick. I'm going to answer questions. Let me just see if I can get there to block those bots, because it's not good. Okay, we deleted it. Thanks, Billy. All right. Coming in for questions now, y'all. Just let that stand on its own. Let's see. No, I mean, this is skilled labor. We're talking about the truck drivers. Kowalski at Prairie Fire says people with a Class A license are statistically the safest drivers in the country. You need to be very qualified to drive 90,000 pounds. HEB was just celebrating one of their drivers who hit 1 million miles or something like that. And it was nice they gave him an honor in a commercial, but you're just wondering, it's like, are they paying you something extra with this, or they're just gonna put you on TV for a little bit? Seems something's missing from the equation there. All right. It's a good point by S. Farkin, SV Harkin. If you tie the median wage to CEO pay, that's the only motivation they would ever have to increase worker pay. And just on that, a really great book if you're looking for um, like a good introduction to thinking about financialization. It's a couple decades old, but Doug Henwood's book, After the New Economy, is a really great introduction to thinking about how financialization has taken over the American corporation. And this point here is like, so if you tied the max compensation package of a CEO to the salary of the median worker, you would undoubtedly see an increase in wages that were going to workers, because there's a self-interest there. This is actually in reverse what happened in the 70s and 80s, where CEOs were tied to the stock price instead of to the way they were running the company or to the salaries they were paying their workers, right? You start to see this move because there's all this demand. Oh, CEOs don't care enough about the poor shareholders, right? The shareholders are always being forgotten. This was, Reagan time. And you saw a lot of corporations moving their executive compensation packages to stocks, which meant that these executives had every incentive to just basically bolster the stock price, regardless of what was happening at the bottom. Right. And that's also when you sort of see the professionalization of that kind of executive class where, before, if you worked at a shoe factory, basically somebody who was in that industry and understood that industry. Now you have people who just hop around from, Best Buy to McDonald's. Like there's no real difference between it, right? Because for them, effectively, the only thing that matters to them is inputs and outputs, right? Numbers on a paper. The production starts to become very much secondary to it. Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal point. Thank you so much, Jules, for a super chat. Always appreciate these chats. Thank you, Billy, for the congratulations on my betrothal. I don't know if that's the word I would be using. Um, no, there's no doubt a lot of the truck drivers does skew a little bit older, and that's because it was a little bit more of a viable industry back there, and they need to figure this out, frankly, because it's a little bit too dangerous. Oh, nice! I can do this from here, actually. Oh, I put it up on the screen. Sorry, I was trying to get rid of them. All right. Well, let's see. I'd be happy to maybe take a couple more questions before we roll. We got some exciting stuff. I think we're going to get our shirts. I sent Matt a mock-up. He'll be getting it in a week or so. So hopefully we'll be able to get some Left Reckoning merch out there. If people have any ideas or suggestions, things you might like, let us know. But let's see. And also, don't forget, for people who joined us late, this month in June, we're doing our summer stream. So we're going to make what is typically members only post game, which comes on immediately after the main show on Wednesdays. We're going to make that public. So you'll be able to come in and watch those live. The recordings and the podcast version will still only be for patrons. But we wanted to see if maybe some other folks wanted to come and check out what we're doing behind that paywall and, introduce more people to the Left Reckoning community. We'll be joined by Ben Burgess tomorrow. So that's usually 8:30 Central Time, but it basically depends on when we finish the main show. But that will all be on twitch.tv/Left Reckoning. So be sure to check that out. So all June, those will be public for people to come and check that out. I think we're trying to boost our Twitch stuff too. So Ben's back from vacation. We're making him go to work right away. And I think he might have. Well, I'll have to ask him if he's gonna be able to share this, but he's got um, some stories about a Slovenian philosopher he met, some guy Slavoj Žižek. Should be fun. And thanks, Strom. Yeah, we were on the Valley Labor Report over the weekend. I appreciate the compliment there. Check them out if you're not already following them. They do incredible work out of Alabama, covering the politics there. And let's see, I can get some cues here. We got Conman 2012. He says, "How much can oil companies profiteer and gouge consumers? What is the ceiling for the price of gas?" Well, you'd start to think we're hitting it, but it'll be interesting to basically the way the gas industry works is the ceiling is basically until one of these manufacturers and sellers basically decides that they can't sell it for this much because they're not able to they're losing out on like complete profits basically because they're gouging so much. But I think one of the things going back to financialization, what we're talking about, I've been noting this time and time again in Texas right now, you're getting all these Republicans who are saying all this stuff. I was seeing right-wing family members sharing stuff like, "Oh, well, this is what happens in Biden's America because we're not tapping into our natural resources, and they've basically let the Green New Deal freaks control their brains, and they're not keeping, they're keeping oil in the ground instead of in your truck." Absolute bullshit. The number one reason that gas prices are high right now is not is it's all their individual greed, but it's not just somebody making a decision to increase the price. They're actually limiting production right now, right? And look, we want to pump less oil out of the ground, but this is a moment where you're seeing the dangers of leaving private corporations in control of things that are socially necessary for us, right? And in the society that we live in right now, immediately most people rely on gas to basically power the car and to be mobile. And what they're doing right now is most of the major companies have been doing huge dividend payments to their investors because during the crisis of the COVID pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, you saw a cratering of the price of gasoline. Remember that? And now they're trying to reward all of those investors who stuck with them in that period of time. And instead of taking that money that they're getting right now, this huge windfall, and investing that into production or rehiring the over 200,000 people that they fired here in Texas, they're just paying off the rent seekers, the shareholders. That is, if anything, drop the climate stuff for a second. If anything, is just a reminder how we cannot let private corporations be in control of socially necessary functions like that. The Biden administration has distributed over 900 permits in the Permian Basin, so people do not mistake me or misunderstand me into saying that oil and gas production is going to go down. But at this moment, every incentive is for them basically to sit on their hands and distribute some of the windfall back to their investors and shareholders, and not basically to produce, right? So if you ever hear somebody saying like, "Oh, well, the government's gone woke, the government's gone crazy with their Green New Deal stuff," remind them that actually, no, it's the oil companies not just hiking up the price, but actually taking the profits and not investing them back into production, but actually just paying off people who are already rich. It's actually really, really crazy if you think about it. Ooh, that's a good idea for a merch. Maybe some bum steer merch. We need some catchy slogans and catchphrases to market. I like it. Is it goofy if I did come on by? I was thinking that might be fun on the back of a t-shirt, but I made some smoked pork butts on Sunday, 15 pounds, way too much. Any recipes, ideas for all the leftovers? I mean, other than the obvious of things like tacos, it'd be really good is if, and you're in New Mexico, so you're like wealthy in this sense. Get some dried chilies, toast them up, pick whichever ones you like, toast them up, put them in a big bowl of boiling water for like 30, 45 minutes to rehydrate them. I'm sure you probably already know how to do this. Throw them in the blender with some oil, maybe some salt, a couple other spices, put it over the pork mix, and then you have a kind of, I don't know, New Mexico pork chili, whatever you want to call it. You can come up with a name for it, but like that's a great way to use extra meat. Like whenever I make too much brisket or too much chuck roast, I always just make a Texas chili out of it, and it's good as hell. Also, yeah, since someone gave me the opportunity to talk about food, I was in Colorado over the weekend, and like I love Colorado, beautiful place, but nothing drives me crazier than eating chili outside of Texas because every person has like some secret ingredient that they put in chili, and it's never fucking chilies. It's never chilies. Most places, most people, they only use chili powder, which is absolutely insane to me. Like the name of the dish is, it's in the name. It's chilies. Like my Texas chili, I don't use nothing other than chilies, maybe a little onion, maybe a little bit of garlic, right? And if I want different flavors, I add different kinds of chilies. Sometimes I'll add aromatics like coffee, or something like that. But I don't know. Just absolutely wild. I had some chili in Colorado, and I was like, y'all got some good beef, and y'all certainly have access to chilies here. I don't know why you're not using it. Anyway, um, St. Peter says, "Can y'all make a shirt that says Reckoning?" I like that. Um, Somebody says, David, can you point me to dinner literature about Marxist perspectives on intellectual properties post scarcity LVT? I don't have anything off the top of my head. If you send me a message, I could maybe ask around some of the people who really studied that and give you some suggestions. Any thoughts on Cisneros trying to get a recount? I mean, Godspeed. I hope it works. It's tough. It's crazy that she's had all these elections now against Cuellar that have come so close. And it just shows, if it was offensive enough that the National Democratic Party was showing up in support of Cuellar over Cisneros, but it actually, if we're looking at the margins as close as they are, it actually means that they had an effect, right? Because let's even just say that, like, only 5% of people are going to be swayed by Pelosi, showing up for Cuellar. Well, they got the necessary bump there. So best of luck. I hope to see that flipped. I'm no expert in that side of politics. I mean that, like, vote counting stuff, so I can't make any predictions which way it will go, but best of luck for sure. Thanks so much for the super chat, Cobb fan from Australia. Always appreciate our Australian guys. I love that we have a good Australian cohort. That's the thing. Once we get our shows down in the US, maybe sometime, I think trying to maybe visit some of our friends in Europe and in Australia would be great. We'd love to get to South America, obviously. I mean, we were planning such cool stuff with TMBS. It's always such a shame that we weren't able to go and visit everybody. But we would love to come and visit all of y'all. Kowalski says this. Talking about rural America, someone's asked me about this. This is our friend Kowalski from Nebraska. Red state, blue state bullshit. Nationalize the oil industry, too important to be left to profiteering madmen. Exile the CEOs, send them to Jamaica penniless. Don't do that to to Dave. We can think of some, yeah. Sorry, Dave from Jamaica. We could think of somewhere better to send him. Ooh, I'm sorry, Strom. I'm not a big Allman Brothers band fan. I don't dislike them, but I never had a real phase there. Yeah, exactly. Joe Biden raised the price of gas, right? The petrol companies want lower prices, but Joe won't let them. Yeah, I mean, it's so crazy, especially when Biden, this isn't even a defense of him. Biden is actually like pillaging the land, and what he's doing in response to the bullying that he's getting from the right and the oil companies right now will have a long-term effect. They're opening up public lands. They're approving more drilling permits across Texas right now. Like, he's actually giving them everything that they want, which is like the worst reaction to this crisis. Yeah. Strom says PD vinegar sauce or Orangeburg sweet sauce. So I'll be honest, I don't cook much barbecue pork here. I think the vinegar sauce is best for that. I would just say, like, as a general dipping sauce, or maybe throwing on some ribs. I like that sweet sauce. Um, Yeah, here's going back to the chili conversation. Congressional baseball fans, it's like, yes, thank you. Chili with like corn and cinnamon in it. What are they doing? Yeah, I mean, look, it's not that like it grosses me out as a concept. It's just like at the point where you're starting to add weirder things in it, it's like you better at least have one fucking chili in your chili. It's really crazy to me. I mean, this would be fun. This might be a lot more work than you're thinking, though. But it says release a Left Reckoning cookbook. I wonder what Matt's contribution would be. A nice glass of milk, but tie some history lessons with lefty politics in there to reach a wider audience. You can write up Chile, Texas Cowboys, and land barons with their barbed wire. And I would love to do that. You know, there's a really great barbecue truck here in Austin called Distant Relatives, and I'm sure they'll come out with a cookbook at some time in the future, but they really try to make a point of what they call the food West African diaspora cooking. You know, and they're talking about Black American cooking in the South and building off of the traditions from West African food traditions, right? So it's like it's very familiar, but like, you know, some things is like they're not going to go. I don't know, they're trying to keep it like, so there's a lot of like really great like stews and obviously ribs and chicken and things like that. Amazing food. And it's really cool, honestly, to highlight you know, that history and that innovation and that like culture in that way. um I love anchos in Chile. I think anchos are like number one. That's usually like the 4 or 5 that I do for my base, and then add a couple of others. Let's see. Friend Dakota says, "Oh God, I'm from BC, Canada. I may have never had real chili before." There are other dishes out there where you're stewing beef, or chicken or beans or whatever, and they're good. I mean, that's like there's a reason that that's a technique. But like chili in particular, think about where it comes from. Chili comes, it's cowboy cooking from people who uh, they had obviously a lot of access to beef, but they also needed to use a lot of dry goods. So that's why they basically took dried chilies and maybe some garlic, onions, things that stay very well, maybe some cumin, and they would turn that into a stew, which became chili. That's why, like, I don't hold this like super. Jesus Christ, I got excited. Um, I don't hold super. I don't get worked up about it. People do it, but like in mine, I don't even use tomatoes in it. I'll add tomatoes as a garnish on top, but it's just straight up chilies, onions, and garlic. Man, you get me hungry. Um, I'm not a chili snob. What is chili powder? Chili powder is a processed version of chilies. Dried chilies have been part of cowboy cooking for a long time. Our friend here says AOC says Congress is morally bankrupt. Is this a sign that progressives in Congress are giving up? I don't think that's the message there. But should we focus resources to unions and organizing in general than focusing on um, progressive congressional races? I think that the focus has to be on labor and building up the class power. I think that it's in, like, what does Marx say about elections? Like, elections are worthwhile for us to test ourselves and our power and to build power. But the focus certainly has to be in the class, right? Um, that's that's certainly number one. This game of like having to pick one or the other, I think, is a mistake that some people fall into. I mean, like, for example, like we said right here on this program, um, don't donate money to the Democratic Party over abortion rights. Donate it to abortion rights groups that provide and protect people. Because the Democratic Party has just used this to successfully fundraise for a long time. And I'm just saying that because, like, well, one, because I agree with it, and two, because, like, you know, this is not a program that just advocates for electoralism. I don't even like that term. But like electoral politics above all. I think that the most important thing that we need to do is be rebuilding a class organization, but we should be seizing power every opportunity that we have. That's why I support, you know, DSA candidates who are running for office. there's a lot in that question about how to relate to AOC and the squad in general, and I will have to just suggest that you maybe check out some of the other videos that we've done on the topic. So we spent a lot of time on it, and we certainly will spend more on it. But no, I don't think that AOC basically saying that Congress is morally bankrupt is a sign that we shouldn't pursue politics anymore, right? I think that would be a mistake. I think that it's worth. I think one of the most important things for people to realize, though, is that like that there are a lot of people who are progressive. Think about somebody like Ro Khanna, who don't share our politics, and I think people need to be a little bit more willing to confront them, and to not paint the picture that we're all sort of in alliance. What we're trying to do right now is to build the power of the working class and to direct that into a political organization and a political movement. And I think running candidates for office is certainly going to be a part of it. But don't let that be the only thing you do, but also don't fall into this kind of black pill thing where you're like, well, we're not going to do politics anymore. Because our political system is corrupt. The point has to be to win power wherever we can. Favorite beer? I like all beer. I used to work at a beer bar, so I used to not be snobby, but be like, oh, I love this like very specific thing. I'll say the best states in the country for craft beer are Maine, Michigan, and Colorado. My favorite beer, mainly I just drink normal people beer. I just drink Lone Star. But I love like a good like farmhouse ale or a no, I drink them all, IPAs and stuff like that too. Local stuff, I like Allstat a lot. I like St. Arnold's here in Texas. I like Austin Brew Works. I like St. Elmo. I think Fetterman has come off extremely healthy since his stroke. I'm actually not worried about that at all these days. Those are fighting words to a Texan. Totally. And like, Sharice David's barely won my district against Brett Wilder, mainly because corporate dem money is disheartening how easy it is for fat cash dump to block a decent candidate. I mean, even going to Pennsylvania, right? Look how much money Fetterman had to spend in the Democratic primary. That puts you in a weakened position when you're going to the general election too. I haven't heard about what's going on in Washington. Tommy says, have you heard about Stephanie Gallardo's congressional race against Adam Smith in Washington? I haven't, but send it. I might, if I'm feeling nostalgic, I might say Coke, but I probably would say soda. Some places some people in Texas will say Dr. Pepper in the same way people in Georgia say Coke, which is very funny to me. A good stout's always good, but it's too hot for stout in Texas right now. I love Jester King here in Austin. Jester King's like a good like sour beer place, and it's a little bit Disneylandish because it's out on like a ranch kind of property. But when I grew up, we had a little ranch and we raised goats, and they have goats at the brewery there, and that always makes me a little nostalgic for home. But anyways, y'all, I think I will roll. I'll see y'all tomorrow with Matt Leck. We're going to be joined by Kurt Hackbarth. We're going to talk about AMLO. And then after that, remember, we're doing our summer streams. So we'll be opening up, making these public only on Twitch, twitch.tv/Left Reckoning. So you'll get the post game, even if you're not a subscriber, but you should subscribe at patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We're going to be joined by Ben Burgess. We'll be taking your questions from the chat. We'll be taking Discord questions from patrons, and we'll also be playing voicemails from patrons as well. So be sure to check that out if you're not already a patron and see what we're offering this weekend too. Just reminding folks, we're doing a think tank. So there's a post up on Patreon right now for patrons. Get your questions in. If there's anything a little bit, more complicated, if you even have like a video or something short, I'm talking like a minute, you can maybe submit it or have something for us to react to. Like if you have a cool Michael Parenti clip, maybe, right, that you want to see Matt and I maybe riff on and talk about. Love to do something like that. So you can get that by going to patreon.com/leftreckoning, go to the post, ask us a question, drop us a line if you have a video or something like that too. And as always, take care, everybody. I'll see y'all tomorrow evening, 7 Central.